Welcome everyone. You are listening to the account with a new summary for day 393 of the war in Ukraine. Thank you for joining me. As a quick personal update, as some of you may know, my wife is currently in the last stages of her pregnancy with the official due date set in about 2 weeks' time. On top of that, we are also preparing to move houses. Due to these circumstances, there's a chance that I will not be able to record a video without any heads up. Should that happen, I will of course include the important topics in the next update. There is no extra segment or highlighted article today. All updates are grouped into the usual: situation inside Ukraine, the occupied territories, Russia and Belarus, and international developments. Before we start the report, the flashpoints along the front. Kreminna. The Russian offensive here seems to be stalling. Reports that north of Dniepr, Ukraine managed to push Russian troops back. In the forest south of Kreminna, Russia is unable to break through Ukrainian defenses. Bakhmut. Battles in and around Bakhmut continue. Minor Russian advances are reported, but nothing really noteworthy. In general, the situation has stabilized but remains critical. Oleksandr Syrsky, the commander of the ground forces of the armed forces of Ukraine, stated that near Bakhmut the Russian army loses significant forces, and very soon the armed forces of Ukraine will take advantage of this opportunity, as they did near Kiev, Kharkiv, Balaklia and Kupiansk. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said that the fierce fighting for Bakhmut shows the Kremlin's willingness to commit thousands of soldiers for minimal success on the battlefield. Meanwhile, Yevgeny Prigozhin, head of the Wagner PMC, claims that Ukraine has amassed 80,000 soldiers around Bakhmut. Avdiivka. Heavy fighting continues around Avdiivka, however, no major advances were reported today. A look at all the minor updates out of Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky visited Kherson Oblast today, met with residents and promised to restore everything the Russian invaders destroyed. Rescuers have retrieved one more body from under the rubble of a hall of residents in the town of Rzhyshchiv in Kiev Oblast. Thus, the number of fatalities of the recent Russian attack rose to 9. Ukraine has realized that there was no point in talking to the Russian president long before the International Criminal Court issued a warrant for Vladimir Putin's arrest. The Synod of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, affiliated with the Russian Orthodox Church, announced its decision to protect the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra by all legal means. For several months, Russian propaganda has been announcing a large-scale offensive of the Russian army in Ukraine, but the enemy has no success. According to Skibitsky, the general bravado of the invaders was more based on misinformation and a general overestimation of their own capabilities. In reality, however, they faced the inability of conducting an offensive simultaneously in several directions. During this month, the Russian army lost about 25,000 soldiers killed and 75,000 wounded in the war against Ukraine. American officer Dan Rice, a special advisor to the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Valery Zaluzhny, announced today. Russia launched a missile strike from fighter jets on Odesa Oblast in the evening. The air defense system shot down 2 Kh-59 missiles. Next up, the latest regarding the situation in the occupied territories. Director General Raffaele Mariano Grossi of the International Atomic Energy Agency has expressed concern that the last remaining backup power line at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, damaged 3 weeks ago, remains under repair. An explosion was reported in Russian-occupied Melitopol in the morning. According to Vladimir Rogov, a member of the main council of Zaporizhzhia Oblast administration, a policeman was injured and hospitalized with injuries of varying degrees of severity. Russian state-controlled media reported that the collaborator targeted by Ukrainian partisans is a man named Serhiy Skovirk. Andrii Bilozerov, former teacher from temporarily occupied Simferopol, who has already been twice arrested for Ukrainian songs, has been accused of discrediting the Russian army and fined 100,000 rubles, roughly $1,300. He was also banned from writing on social networks for 2 years. The National Resistance Center claims that Wagner forces began to forcibly move residents from the outskirts of Bakhmut, Donetsk Oblast, and deporting them to remote regions of the Russian Federation. Moving on to the news updates from Russia and Belarus. Former chairman of Russia's Central Election Commission Vladimir Churov died of a massive heart attack on Wednesday. Churov was also known as the Magician, as he had a reputation for securing the government's desired election results. Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, has claimed in an interview with Russian propagandists that Ukraine is part of Russia and that the West has underestimated the Kremlin's determination to start a war. Medvedev also threatened Germany, saying that should Germany actually execute the arrest warrant against Russian President Vladimir Putin, Russia would see it as a declaration of war. Additionally, Medvedev read out Joseph Stalin's telegram in front of the directors of Russian defense plants, urging them to fulfill their duty to the motherland on time, otherwise they would be crushed like thieves. Mykhail Mishustin, Prime Minister of Russia, admitted that Russia has been breaking the rules accepted by it upon joining the World Trade Organization in 2012 for a long time. And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. The International Criminal Court in The Hague responded to threats made by Russia, expressing regret over the country's attempts to obstruct international efforts to ensure accountability for violations of international law. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and possible Republican presidential candidate called Russian President Vladimir Putin a war criminal and said that Ukraine has every right to return the temporarily occupied Crimea. DeSantis said that Russia is, in fact, a gas station with a bunch of nuclear weapons, probably a reference to the famous phrase by Republican Senator John McCain, who called the Russian Federation a gas station pretending to be a country. The Deputy Minister for Defense Information and Communications of France said at a briefing that Ukrainians will be trained in the operation of air defense systems of the surface-to-air class. He further denied yesterday's media reports about the training of Ukrainian pilots on Mirage 2000 fighters in France. Finland will send Leopard 2 tanks as part of the 14th military aid package to Ukraine. The decision was approved by Finnish President Sauli Niinistö. Meanwhile, Spain's defense ministry reported it would transfer the first 6 of 10 Leopard 2 main battle tanks it has pledged for Ukraine by the end of next week. Slovakia has transferred 4 of the 13 MiG-29 jets it has pledged to Ukraine. Iceland has recognized the Holodomor of 1932 to 1933 as a genocide against the Ukrainian people. The EU leaders who are meeting today in Brussels adopted a resolution on Ukraine expressing their unwavering support for the people of Ukraine in the fight against Russian aggression and calling on Russia to immediately and unconditionally withdraw its troops from the entire territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Despite the arrest warrant issued by the International Criminal Court, Hungary will not detain Russian President Vladimir Putin if he enters the country. The Swedish Riksdag approved on Thursday the government's proposal to send Ukraine a new military aid package that includes Archer self-propelled gun systems and Leopard 2 tanks. The Danish Department of Energy has released an image of an object found near the intact Nord Stream 2 pipe. It is approximately 40 centimeters tall and 10 centimeters in diameter. Authorities are suggesting that it is the remains of a smoke marker buoy. This washed up on the shore of Bornholm quite regularly. And now for the intelligence report segment, starting with the UK Ministry of Defence. Since the start of March 2023, heavy fighting has continued in parts of the Svatove-Kremina sector of the front line in northern Luhansk Oblast. Russia has partially regained control over the immediate approaches to Kremina town, which was under immediate Ukrainian threat earlier in the year. In places, Russia has made gains of up to several kilometers. Russian commanders are likely trying to expand a security zone west from the defense line they have prepared along higher ground and integrate the natural obstacle of the Oskil River. They likely seek to recapture Kupiansk, a logistic node. Operationally, Russia's intent in the northeast likely remains defensive. Commanders probably fear this is one of the sectors where Ukraine could attempt major offensive operations. A look at the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War. The Russian military has lost so many tanks since February 24, 2022, that it is apparently calling up ancient armored vehicles to make up for its current battlefield losses, according to findings of the Tbilisi-based open-source conflict intelligence team. The research group reported on March 22 that Russian forces transported a train loaded with T-54-55 tanks from Primorsky Krai towards western Russia, and social media sources speculated that Russian forces might deploy them to Ukraine, the institute stated. Russian armored vehicle losses are currently constraining the Russian military's ability to conduct effective mechanized maneuver warfare, and Russian forces may be deploying T-54-55 tanks from storage to Ukraine to prepare for anticipated mechanized Ukrainian counteroffensives. The deployment of inferior equipment to replenish the Russian military's ability to conduct mechanized maneuver warfare may prompt a further degradation of Russian manpower in Ukraine. According to Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, the Ministry of Defense plans to increase the size of Russia's air defense forces. The plan allegedly is to form a new air defense division and brigade, a special-purpose air defense missile brigade, a new anti-aircraft missile regiment with more advanced S-350 systems, a military transport aviation regiment, and complete the modernization of Moscow City's air defense systems. However, the researchers argue, the Russian military is unlikely to be able to generate these forces for several years. Therefore, it is highly likely that these statements are aimed at reassuring the Russian public that the Russian Ministry of Defense continues to develop the Russian military into a world-class military power. The institute also took a look at reports that the tempo of Russian operations around Bakhmut are slowing down. The researchers are suggesting that the current increase in operations around Avdiivka most likely comes at the cost of the operations around Bakhmut and Avdiivka. A Russian mill blogger claimed on March 21 that parts of the 136th Motorized Rifle Brigade, which is allegedly operating around Vuhledar, are actually operating in Avdiivka. If the report is true, it could indicate that Russia is prioritizing the operations around Avdiivka currently. The institute points out that the Russian 2nd Motorized Rifle Division of the 1st Guards Tank Army, which was reconstituted in Belarus and deployed to Luhansk Oblast, has yet to be committed to any offensives. Russia may commit this unit to one or more offensive already underway, or to a new offensive undertaking. However, they are unlikely to achieve operationally decisive effects. Further minor topics assessed were: Russian forces conducted a limited drone and missile strike campaign in Ukraine overnight on March 21 to 22, indicating that Russian forces continue struggling with precision missile shortages. Shoigu likely signaled to Japan that it should not attempt to exploit Russia's current military vulnerability in the Kuril Islands, and to China that Russia remains a worthwhile military partner. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu walked away and refused to answer a question about how soon to expect peace in Ukraine. Russian authorities are cracking down against bars in urban areas, possibly to crack down against internal dissent among Russian social circles. And to wrap up the report, the evening update by the General Staff of Ukraine. The level of missile threat remains high throughout the territory of Ukraine. In the Volyn, Poliske, Siversk and Sloboshansk directions, the operational situation has not changed significantly. At the same time, the enemy continues to engineer terrain in the border areas of Bryansk and Kursk oblasts. Also, on the territory of the Belgorod Oblast, the Soviet Union of the Russian Federation is holding a group of troops to carry out demonstration actions to prevent the transfer of our units to other directions. In the Kupiansk and Liman directions, the enemy also maintains its military presence in the border areas with Ukraine in order to prevent the transfer of our units to other directions. During the current day, the enemy unsuccessfully tried to break through the defense of our troops in the areas of Sinkivka settlements of Kharkiv and Makivka of Luhansk oblasts. In the direction of Bakhmut, the enemy does not stop trying to capture the city of Bakhmut, where constant positional battles continue. At the same time, our defenders repelled enemy attacks in the areas of Oleksandro-Shultine and Vasyuikivka settlements. In the Avdiivka, Marinka and Shakhtarsk directions, the enemy carried out unsuccessful offensive actions in the direction of the settlements of Novokalinove, Stepove, Avdiivka, and Siverne in Donetsk Oblast. In the Zaporizhia and Kherson directions, the enemy is conducting defensive operations. Also, in a number of settlements of the temporarily occupied left bank part of the Kherson Oblast, the invaders began searching for citizens with a pro-Ukrainian position. For this, they use lists of ATO participants, military pensioners, and lists of those who served in law enforcement agencies of Ukraine. There was an additional entry about Russian units leaving Novakhovka, Kherson Oblast. However, the General Staff released an update saying, "The occupiers are still temporarily in Novakhovka. Information about the alleged withdrawal of the enemy from the settlement was made public as a result of incorrect use of available data. However, we will definitely free Novakhovka as well." And that wraps up the report. Should you be interested in details, you can find links to every article I mentioned in the description as usual. If you enjoyed the report and found it informative, please consider sharing it with others and giving me a like. I hope you will join me again tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.